The first time I saw him sitting in my office, hunched over with his hands clasped tightly in his lap, I almost didn't recognize him. His hair was thinner, his jawline softer, his once confident smirk completely gone. He looked nervous, terrified even, and when his eyes met mine, I saw a flash of recognition. "Mela?" he whispered, his voice cracking. I smiled, leaning back in my leather chair, fingers intertwined calmly on my desk. "Yes, Travis. It's me." His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. The man who once humiliated me in front of an entire classroom, who mocked my dreams, who called me pathetic and delusional, was now sitting in front of me, applying for a job under me. And I couldn't help but think of that day in high school, the day I decided I would never let anyone make me feel small again. Growing up, I was the invisible kid, not because I wanted to be, but because that's what survival looked like. My parents were always working 2, sometimes 3 jobs, leaving me to fend for myself most nights. I'd sit cross-legged on my bed, surrounded by stacks of library books, teaching myself things I wasn't learning in school. At 16, I was quiet, awkward, and painfully self-conscious. I wore thrift store clothes that never quite fit, and my hair was always tied back in a messy bun because I didn't own a straightener like the other girls. I didn't go to parties or football games. I spent most of my weekends babysitting or working at the diner downtown to save money for college. But I had dreams, big ones, dreams of becoming a CEO, running my own company, and building a life so different from the one I'd been handed. My vision board was covered in magazine cutouts of skyscrapers, sleek offices, and power suits I couldn't even imagine affording at the time. In school, though, dreams like mine were something to be laughed at. Travis, especially, made sure of it. He was the golden boy, captain of the basketball team, straight white teeth, always surrounded by a pack of friends who hung on his every word. He noticed me once, just once. It was during senior year when our teacher made us give presentations about our future goals. I stood in front of the class, my hands shaking as I clutched my note cards. "I want to own my own business," I said softly. "I want to build a tech company that changes the world." The class erupted in laughter, but it was Travis's voice that cut through the noise. "Yeah, right," he scoffed, leaning back in his chair. You're going to own a company? Maybe one that sells cheap coffee out of your garage." The humiliation burned so deeply that I still remember the sound of their laughter echoing in my ears. That was the day I promised myself I'd never be laughed at like that again. College wasn't an option at first. Even with scholarships, I couldn't afford it, and no one in my family had ever gone before me. So while my classmates packed for dorm rooms and frat parties, I was stocking shelves at a grocery store, crying quietly in the bathroom during lunch breaks because I felt like I was falling behind in life. But every paycheck, I saved. Every break, I studied coding tutorials on my old laptop until my eyes ached. I worked double shifts, poured every ounce of energy into learning business, marketing, and tech. I didn't party, I didn't date, I built. By 23, I launched my first startup from the corner of my tiny apartment. It failed miserably. I cried for weeks, but then I built another, and another. Each failure became a stepping stone, teaching me something new. I'll never forget the night I decided to stop playing small. I was 25, sitting on a bus at midnight after a 14-hour shift. My phone buzzed with a rejection email from yet another investor. I stared out the window, tears streaming down my face, whispering to myself, "No one believes in you, Mela, not even you." But then I remembered Travis's laughter, that sneer, that look on his face when he told me I'd never amount to anything, and something inside me snapped. I wiped my tears and whispered a different sentence. "I'll make you eat those words." From that moment, I worked harder than ever. I networked, cold emailed, pitched to anyone who would listen. I poured every tip I made at the diner into my business, and slowly things started to change. By 28, my startup wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Investors were calling me. We had a sleek downtown office, a growing team, and revenue numbers that made my accountant grin every quarter. I bought my first designer suit, a crisp navy blue that made me feel like the boss I always dreamed of being. When I walked into that office for the first time as CEO, I swore I could hear my younger self cheering. Success didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like peace, like finally breathing after years of drowning. The company grew fast. We started hiring more staff, expanding departments, and before I knew it, we were interviewing candidates for a new managerial position. I was reviewing resumes late one night when a name made me freeze: Travis Morgan. I clicked his resume, half expecting it to be a joke. But no, there he was: bachelor's degree in marketing, some middling job experience, nothing special. He was applying for a job at my company. My first instinct was to laugh. Karma had a funny way of working, didn't it? A week later, I walked into the conference room for his interview. He was sitting there, in a cheap suit, fidgeting with his tie. The moment he saw me, his face drained of color. "Mela?" he stammered. "Yes," I said smoothly, sliding into my chair. "I'm the CEO here." He blinked, stunned. You're the CEO?" I smiled. "Yes, the same Mela you told would never amount to anything." He chuckled nervously, trying to recover, but his confidence was gone. I could feel the shift in power. The interview was short. I asked all the standard questions, but my tone was calm, professional, almost cold. He tried to make small talk, bringing up high school memories, but I didn't bite. At the end, I closed his file. "Thank you for coming in," I said. "We'll be in touch." He left the room pale, shoulders slumped, and though part of me wanted to reject him outright, another part of me, the part that had once cried herself to sleep because of his words, wanted something else entirely. I hired him. Travis started a week later. On his first day, I called him into my office. "Welcome to the company," I said, leaning forward. "You'll report directly to me. You'll handle everything I assign, no questions asked." He nodded nervously. "Yes, ma'am." For months, he worked under me, and I'll admit, it felt good, not because I enjoyed watching him squirm, but because I turned his cruelty into fuel, and now I was proof that every word he said was wrong. But as time passed, I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected. Watching him struggle didn't heal me. My success had already done that. I remember the day I finally realized that Travis's opinion of me no longer mattered. It was a Tuesday, quiet except for the low hum of office chatter and the distant click of keyboards. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, warming the mahogany desk that symbolized everything I'd worked for. On that desk sat a framed photo of me and Ella, my best friend and now business partner, laughing in our first tiny rented office space years ago. Back then, we were working out of a room no bigger than a walk-in closet, surviving on instant noodles and cheap coffee, fueled by nothing but stubborn dreams. Now we had this: an entire floor of a downtown building, dozens of employees, and contracts with companies I used to only read about in business magazines. And yet, across from me sat Travis, the boy who once defined my teenage insecurities, now a man who avoided my gaze while nervously fiddling with his tie. His voice was softer these days, his posture smaller. The years had worn away his arrogance, replaced with something that almost resembled humility. Almost. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mela," he said quietly, his words laced with shame. I studied him for a moment, taking in the details: the faint creases at the corners of his eyes, the slight slump in his shoulders, the tremble in his hands. This wasn't the boy who'd mocked me in front of a classroom full of people. This was someone else entirely, a man who'd learned his own lessons the hard way. And as I sat there, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not revenge, but peace. It was a strange kind of peace, the kind that comes when you finally realize you don't need to prove yourself to anyone. For years, I'd carried his words like scars etched into my skin. "You own a company?" That sentence used to echo in my head every night I stayed up working on code, every time I skipped meals to save money, every time an investor laughed at my pitch. It fueled me, yes, but it also haunted me. I thought success would silence that voice forever, and in a way, it did, but not because I'd hired him or because I had power over him now. It was because I didn't care anymore. His opinion didn't hold weight, his laughter didn't sting. The chains of my past had been broken, not by revenge, but by my own perseverance. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my legs, and said something I'd never imagined saying to him. "Travis, I don't hate you. You hurt me, sure, but you also pushed me, unintentionally. You were one of the reasons I refused to give up. So, thank you." His eyes flicked up, stunned. "You're thanking me?" he said, his voice trembling. Yes, I replied simply. You reminded me that the only person I need to prove anything to is myself. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He just sat there, his face pale and unreadable. Then he nodded slowly, as if my words carried more weight than I realized. I'm sorry, Mela, he said softly, for everything I said back then. I was a stupid kid. Hearing him apologize didn't heal me. I'd already done that work myself, but it did feel like a chapter closing, like finally placing a period at the end of a long, painful sentence. That night, I stayed late at the office. The city lights glimmered through the windows, and I sat there, sipping tea and reflecting on the years that had led me here. I thought about the girl I used to be, the shy, insecure teenager in thrift store clothes who sat in the back of the classroom, doodling business ideas in the margins of her notebooks because she didn't think anyone would take her seriously. I thought about the exhaustion of juggling two jobs while teaching myself coding, the sting of every rejection email, the nights I cried myself to sleep because it felt like I'd never get out of the cycle of poverty and fear. And I thought about the small victories that had kept me going. The first time a client said yes, the first time I saw my code actually work, the first time I was able to buy my own apartment. Each step felt insignificant at the time, but looking back, I realized every single one of them was a brick in the foundation of the life I'd built. Revenge had been my motivation at first. I won't lie about that. I used to fantasize about moments like this, where I'd finally show everyone who doubted me, where I'd make them regret laughing at me. But the truth? That kind of revenge feels empty once you get there. Because by the time I was sitting behind that desk, looking across at Travis, I didn't want to humiliate him anymore. I didn't want to see him suffer. I wanted something much bigger than that: closure. Real success isn't about proving people wrong. It's about proving yourself right. It's about waking up every day in a life you built with your own hands, knowing no one handed it to you. It's about choosing growth over bitterness, empathy over vengeance, peace over pain. I kept Travis on the team, not because I needed to assert dominance or because I felt pity for him, but because I believed in second chances. We were both different people, no. Shaped by our own struggles and mistakes. Over time, he proved himself to be a hardworking employee, and our conversations became easier. One day he even said, "You're the best boss I've ever had." I smiled at him, and it wasn't forced, because deep down, I'd realized something important. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone else off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the weight they put on you. I didn't forgive him for his sake. I forgave him for mine. And if you're listening to this, maybe you've had your own Travis. Maybe someone told you you'd never be enough, that your dreams were too big, that you weren't capable of greatness. Maybe those words replay in your mind like a broken record. I want you to know something. Their words don't define you. They never did. I'm living proof that you can come from nothing, that you can turn every insult into fuel, and that you can rewrite your own story. It won't be easy. You'll cry. You'll want to quit. You'll feel like you're fighting a battle no one else can see. But one day, you'll wake up and realize you're not fighting anymore. You're winning. And when you get there, when you're finally standing in the life you built, you'll understand what I mean when I say this. Revenge is overrated. Peace is priceless. So here's my lesson, the one I hope you carry with you. Success isn't about making others regret doubting you. It's about becoming the person you always knew you could be, no matter who laughed in your face. And when you finally arrive, you'll see that you don't need anyone's validation, apology, or approval. Because the greatest victory is knowing that you built your life on your own terms. And that's something no one, not even your Travis, can take away.